Suris, without any spoiling, what did you think of the Batman? Just a quick.
I felt like it dragged in places, but I also don't feel like... Do you want my opinion?
Yes.
Is that what you want?
I want your correct opinion.
Then you'll shut the fuck up and let me say my opinion.
I want your good opinion of it. I want an informed opinion, like one that's correct.
Moment is like, I feel like a trick. No.
No.
It's warm in here. I'm going to open the fridge. Hello, I'm the Nostalgia Pup. I intellectualize it so you don't have to. And, oh, hang on, I'm just getting a call coming through. Hello there?
Hello, Nostalgia Pup.
What, Satan? What are you doing here?
You thought you could escape from this, didn't you? You thought you could just talk about Batman all day long and not talk about this one.
No, not that one. Anything but that one, please.
It is your destiny, Nostalgia Pup. You are doomed to review bad movies for all eternity, and the fate of the universe rests on it, for some reason.
Well, if this be my destiny, reviewing movies that other people don't like, and parroting the popular opinion, then I shall step up to that great brave profession and review this absolute train wreck. Okay, calm down, buddy. It's just a fucking movie. Let's go. Do you know how I know that it's been a long time since we last had a Batman movie? And I don't mean like team-ups. I mean just a full-on Batman movie. It's because it's been so long since anyone has had anything to say about Batman and Robin. It seems like every time a new Batman movie releases, we all reflect on Batman and Robin. The YouTube reviewers crawl back out of the woodwork to give this film another ribbing, and then all the people that were involved in the film give it another ribbing as well. Batman and Robin is basically the piñata at the Batman movie release parties. And nearly a quarter of a century later, many people still regard this as maybe one of the worst films ever made, and if not that, it is certainly one of the most highly ridiculed superhero movies of all time. Now, to be honest, in the past, I've not really held that strong feelings towards it. Even at the time of its release, I don't think Batman and Robin was by any stretch the worst superhero movie ever made, let alone the worst movie ever made. I mean, I think we've all forgotten how bad Marvel movies were back then, looking at Captain America 1990, but even on the more well-known at the time DC end of things, you've got Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, which I would say is infinitely worse than Batman and Robin. So, I have decided to go back and reevaluate, to re-watch Batman and Robin for the first time in like 12 years or something. First time since The Dark Knight Rises came out, I guess. Oh, okay, that's just a decade ago. Okay, not as long ago as I thought. The question is it time to retire the age-old tradition of beating the candy out of Batman and Robin, or has time been kind to it? Here are my thoughts. First things first, it is a different world to what it was when Batman and Robin came out, and I think it is absolutely important when reevaluating this film that we do remember the context of back then and the context of today. I think it is, for me anyway, easier to forgive missteps in Batman's history now that we live in a post-Nolan world. The game has changed. We've got good Batman movies now. Plenty of good, mature Batman movies. We've got Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, Snyder's Justice League, The Batman. We're fucking drowning in good Batman movies now. And don't even get me started on animation. There is just a wealth of amazing Batman content these days. So my attitude towards Batman and Robin in 2022 is going to be different to the attitudes of the movie-going public back then. So right off the bat, I want to say, you are not wrong for hating this movie back in the day. You're not even wrong for hating it today. Obviously, opinions is opinions. Comic book movies back then were much more experimental. They had much more to prove to the film-going public that this film failed to do completely. Throughout like the 80s and 90s, comic books were maturing a lot, being less confection for children and much more adult entertainment, more grounded and believable in three-dimensional characters, more genuine violence. These things wanted to be taken seriously, and comic book fans wanted to take it seriously, and fans of Batman wanted to take it seriously. Not to mention that Batman and Robin is ultimately a sequel. It is the fourth film in a lineage of films which began with Batman 1989, a film that proved that these superhero films could be taken seriously. Batman and Robin strips all of that away and dials everything not just back to the Silver Age of comics as seen in, say, the 1960s, it goes back a little further and makes something even more campy, over the top, and pantomimal than even that. A lot of people blame director Joel Schumacher to the extent that he even made a public apology for this film. And it's really sad to me to see that Joel Schumacher is primarily remembered for being the man that quote-unquote destroyed Batman, when he's got so many great films under his belt, such as Falling Down, which I've talked about in a previous video. The man was absolutely an artist, and he was working under a lot of constraints when it came to Batman and Robin. Warner Brothers were really pushing him to make this a Batman film for all the family, like they did with Batman Forever, but even harder with Batman and Robin. If you look at what Joel Schumacher really wanted to do with the character, he proposed various different projects which were much more in line with what fans would have wanted, such as a Batman Year One adaptation. So right out of the gate, whatever you feel towards this film, I don't think it should have ever been directed at Joel Schumacher. And I think he much more deserves to be remembered for his really great films. And even then, everything that went wrong with Batman and Robin was the result of studio interference. Now, where has our generation heard of that before, And that's another thing, while I'm not just viewing Batman and Robin through a post-MCU, post-Nolan lens, I'm also viewing it in a post-Joss Whedon Justice League lens. I'm also viewing it in a post-Fantastic lens. I am also viewing it through a post-Amazing Spider-Man 2 lens. So what I'm saying is I fully understand why this film was initially received the way it was. But again, this video is not just about Batman and Robin within the context of the time it came out. This video is checking in on our old pal and seeing if they're looking any better than when we last saw them. So right out of the gate, it is obvious what people didn't like about this film at the time. The tone of this thing is consistently goofy. Save for the more personal moments, the action in this film goes way over the top. Like, there's the top, and then there's the fucking sun, and this film just jumps straight over that. With the dialogue consisting mostly of puns and wisecracks. No, this is not how people talk. There's not a single scene in this film that features people talking the way people talk in the real world. At the same time, I've said that about the Christopher Nolan Batman films as well. It's in a very different way, though. While this is all very comedic and over the top, the Nolan ones are very self-serious, and it kind of sounds like every character has a speech prepared before they speak. Everything is so thickly intertwined with the philosophical aspects of those movies. So the way I see it, this is really just a different style. I'm using the same sort of excuse for this as I used for Spider-Man 1 2002. With its very hokey comic book dialogue, I see it more as a style than a failing. And it's all quite clearly deliberate as well. While our protagonists tend to play things straight, the villains just play things up and just really go ham. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Uma Thurman are playing their respective roles as though they are cartoon characters. They're really going over the top, not just on like body language, but just also like Mr. Freeze yells everything he says, and Uma Thurman just ramps up sensuality to a comedic degree, and all of that bleeds through to the visual aesthetic of the film as well. Gotham City is a neon emblazoned city of high-rise skyscrapers which are made of fucking Greek statues. The epitome of this being the Gotham Observatory, which is this gigantic Greek statue holding up an observatory, which just looks amazing in my opinion. This is clearly not meant to be grounded in any form of realism here. Like when Robin bursts through the door in the opening battle as well, and he leaves behind the shape of a Robin symbol in the door. Like, I don't think anyone involved in this film needed to be told that's not realistic. They knew completely what they were doing. You've got icicles everywhere, which are lit up, illuminated in blue. Fucking Mr. Freeze's mouth straight up lights up in blue. I don't think anybody needs to be told that this is illogical, because logic is not what this film is going for, and it shows, as pretty much everyone in this is on wires at all times. Batman and Robin are equipped with ice skates in their shoes so they can play hockey with Mr. Freeze's goons. After Mr. Freeze launches in a rocket, they surf back to Earth on the doors of the rocket. You don't need to tell me that this is silly. You don't need to tell anyone that this is silly. The film straight up knows it and is completely unapologetic about it. And because of the flexible sense of logic that this film has in of itself, it means that there's not actually that many opportunities for them to break those rules, for them to fuck up on the logic that they have laid out. I'm completely fine with this film being cartoony. I'm completely fine with it being silly and over the top, because we've got plenty of serious Batman movies these days, plenty of grounded Batman movies these days, and my heart is big enough for a lighter Batman as well. So really what this depends on is, does Batman and Robin do that silly, zany, over-the-top cartoony atmosphere well? Does it do justice to the premise it's trying to present? Well, let me give you an example. Mr. Freeze's lair is snowy cones. It's like an abandoned ice cream factory, and the outer facade of it is a giant snowman's head. Inside, he's conducting his goons, who are clad in Inuit clothing, to sing along with Snow Miser, and they're freezing their asses off, and they've got their tongues stuck to frozen TV dinners from frostbite, and Mr. Freeze is tapping his toes in these polar bear slippers. Yeah, okay, if you want to make this film feel like a cartoon, you've very much done it. There's Dr. Woodrow, the man responsible for the creation of both Bane and Poison Ivy, and he is straight up a cartoon cackling scientist. Hell, their laboratory looks like something out of the fucking Rocky Horror Picture Show. Poison Ivy's entrance at the Gotham Gala is pure art. The way she comes in dressed like an ape and removes it, and everyone's gasping and they're all looking in her direction, and like these men all just lay down on the floor, allowing her to walk over them. So much work was gone into crafting these dazzling sequences, into making this feel like a big, stylish, sexy event. And that's the bottom line, is the film's got style. Whether you like that style or not, whether you want to admit it or not, it's got style. And the film's just dripping with it. Even like when, you know, for example, Mr. Freeze freezes all of Gotham City using the observatory, and you see this little bulldog get frozen, and then when he gets unfrozen, he shakes himself off and such. It's just, you know, that willingness to explore just how silly this can get. And it's like, you know, you don't have to like it, but one has to acknowledge there's a definite art to it. And I think that's something that clicks about me with this film. Not only is it consistent, it's silly but sincere. It knows what it wants to do, and it just goes right ahead with it. No, this is not how I would do a Batman film. No, this is not what I would ever have in mind. But I can't deny that if they wanted to do a pantomimal Batman film that goes over the top and it's just this big laser light show for the audience, I mean, they did it, didn't they? I mean, can anyone really say that this film is not entertaining? It's pure entertainment as far as I'm concerned. But okay, we got style down. Does it have substance? That's another question altogether. And yeah, I would say it does. Like, we've got some themes in there. The themes of life and death, with basically Bruce Wayne and Mr. Freeze standing on two opposite ends of a similar conundrum. And it's like Mr. Freeze and Batman both want the same thing. They want to stave off death. Not for themselves, but for someone who's very precious to them. In the case of Bruce Wayne, there's Alfred, who is dying of McGregor syndrome. And in the case of Freeze, there is his wife, Nora. And Mr. Freeze goes about this in a my way or the highway, very bull-headed kind of way. He's willing to destroy people in order to save his wife. And I think something Batman kind of displays is a little bit of that bullheadedness as well, his lack of consideration for Robin. He's basically being very overprotective towards his son-like figure. He's never been a family man before. And again, family, it's another very major aspect of this film. In his dying days, Alfred kind of wants to surround himself with family, which demonstrates a bit more of that humility to Bruce. And Bruce learns to be less forceful with Robin. So there is a pretty good dichotomy between Batman and Freeze. I don't think that the theme is executed perfectly, because Mr. Freeze's very sort of bullheaded my way or the highway nature is relating directly to Nora, whereas it doesn't really relate to Alfred and Bruce's end, it relates more to Robin. It does definitely feel like there is a bit of a crossed wire in there, but at the same time, I think it's kind of worth it because I think the dynamic between Alfred and the Bruce is, holy fuck, dare I say, the best it's been? Don't shoot me. Don't shoot me. There's a real sense of earnest family warmth between Alfred and Bruce. We very rarely in Batman films really hear them be warm and open with each other, say they love each other. And this is a Bruce that knows that he's not gonna get to have Alfred forever. And also with Alfred kind of surrounding himself with family, we've also got his niece, Barbara, which is not how Barbara was in the comics, but okay. Taking a few liberties with the source material is okay, just, you know. And I really like the dynamic between Alicia Silverstone's Barbara and Michael Gough's Alfred. There's this moment where she says, you know, she's here to tuck him in. He's like, oh, you're here to tuck me in now, are you? And I like that. I said this movie doesn't really feature how people actually talk, but in that sense, they kind of nailed the humanity there. And I like that Barbara proposes some interesting questions about Alfred. Does he have like a sense of resentment? Has he basically been allowed to think for himself over the course of his life? Did he waste his life on a life of servitude for Bruce? And there are these really nice moments of filmmaking where Bruce will like look to a certain area of Wayne Mansion and remember times when Alfred helped him through like the loss of his parents and such. This stuff is not handled perfectly, but I must admit it's handled pretty well. A common bone of contention among fans is George Clooney as Batman. He often makes the bottom of like the Batman ranking lists and such, and I think that's, to be honest, a little unfair. George Clooney was honestly fine. Now I kind of get it. Like, the films up until this point kind of work to have this dichotomy between Bruce and Batman, in which Batman is like this sort of dark, imposing figure, very intimidating, and Bruce is the charismatic billionaire playboy. Here, Batman is basically just Bruce Wayne, with or without the mask. He's charming, he's charismatic, he's out in public, attending gala events, bidding on women. Oh, how decadent. He is very much playing a more charming and likable Batman through and through, though. However, I must say, I think he absolutely nails the role of Bruce Wayne, and I do think he has the right voice for Batman. He also looks very steely inside the cowl, which I really like. No, I don't think that this is the perfect demonstration of what I think a George Clooney Batman can or should be, but he does well. And I'd definitely rather this Batman than one that sounds like he's gargling marbles. Sorry, I don't mean to throw shade at one Batman to defend another, but I prefer the more human-sounding Batman. So, no, I don't know who the worst Batman is in my opinion, but it's not George Clooney. But it's also just, of all the things to have issues with in this movie, George Clooney, really? I mean, I guess it also makes sense that Batman would lighten up a little bit, as he's becoming more of a family man when it comes to Robin as well. There's also just a really cool little bait and switch in regard to the whole Robin thing, because like there's obviously a lot of tension between Batman and Robin in this film because of Poison Ivy, who's put them both in a bit of a trance into kind of lusting after her, and Batman is better able to deal with that, while Robin's a bit more hormonal and he wants to basically go and be with Ivy and everything. And there's this moment where Batman tries to kind of rebuild the bridge, basically reach out to Robin for help against Ivy. And it looks like he's considering it, but then we see he's gone to Ivy's, but then it's a bait and switch because he's actually there to stop her with Batman behind him. So, like, I really like that moment there. I don't think the performance from Chris O'Donnell as Robin in this one is quite as good as it was in Batman Forever, probably because it couldn't be, because Robin's a lot more complainy in this one, I guess. Alicia Silverstone as Barbara later goes on to become Batgirl. She's given very little to do, and there's definitely a lot less to her than there was when she was Barbara Gordon, the daughter of Commissioner Gordon. But again, Commissioner Gordon doesn't play a big role in these films either, so I guess it makes sense. She does okay with the material she's given, but, meh. So the primary villain is Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze, and naturally there were going to be comparisons between this live-action version of Mr. Freeze and the animated version that came shortly prior. The animated one was much more mature, you could take him seriously, was a tragic character. He made his debut in the Emmy Award-winning episode Heart of Ice. So obviously it's kind of a shame to kind of regress into a retro take on Mr. Freeze, who's all puns and humor and silliness, even though they did adapt his origin story of trying to save Nora. So it's kind of a matter of having it both ways, but at the same time, I don't see this as much more, how should we say, egregious than what they did with Two-Face in Batman Forever, for example, who was also a much more campy version of the Two-Face character. And heck, even the Riddler was played up a lot in Batman Forever as well. I'm not saying it's a great thing to take these tragic characters or even just serious characters and turn them into these very cartoony takes. However, given the style that this movie's in, I get it. It makes sense. It works, I think. Just not perfectly. I mean, I would... Across the board, yes, I would prefer a more serious and more mature Batman film, but as far as taking a comedic Mr. Freeze, how does it go? I think they do it well, and I think Arnold Schwarzenegger is just right for it. But it's not like he also couldn't sell me on some of the more emotional moments. There's a moment where he kind of finds out that Nora is dead, and he sheds like a tear, and then it freezes, and it kind of turns into like ice dust. Ice dust, I mean snow. It fucking ice dust is snow, isn't it? Then we have Poison Ivy, who's even more hammy and even more pantomimal, and she's able to get men in their most kind of primal states, but she kind of wants to make her Garden of Eden kind of thing. She wants to replace all human life with plant life, and Mr. Freeze seems like the kind of guy that can help, because as it happens, he also kind of wants to just freeze the world. In a way, they're a couple of eco-warriors. Mr. Freeze wants to cool the earth, and Ivy wants to restore nature. Kind of more relevant today than it was back then, I think. Again, I don't think it's perfect. Their plans don't perfectly coincide. It's like Mr. Freeze has kind of the attitude of, I'm gonna freeze the earth, and okay, yeah, Ivy, you can do your thing if you want. And Ivy's kind of like, oh, I'm gonna restore flowers, but yeah, you can kind of do your thing if you want as well. But like, she sees him as like this godlike force, so she loves him. And in an act of kind of like wanting to be like his woman and stuff, she pulls the plug on Nora. So she straight up double crosses the guy, which is what pushes him over the edge to completely destroy everything. It's not perfect the way it's executed there either, because he's still pretty smiley and jovial after the death of Nora, the person that he did all this to himself trying to save. But I mean, he remains a fun villain, and we do actually see him get kind of serious at the end when he confronts Ivy in her prison cell, which is actually the most intimidating he's been all movie. But then we have our third villain, Bane, and Bane... Poor Bane. He definitely got the worst rap of the bunch. I'm fine with his character. I'm fine with this grunting lackey. That's fine and all, but Bane, really? He's a master tactician. He's like as clever as Batman in like the comics and source material. So to turn him into a complete grunt is just... I mean, I enjoyed it. But it's not... That's not Bane. No, I feel so sorry for Bane fans. But like having this monstery guy that just screams his name and repeats in like caveman speech and such it's fun. And the actor did a really great job of it. And well, a tragic little fact about the actor. The wrestler Jeep Swanson died during the summer of the film's release due to a heart failure, which many kind of connect to how much he had to bulk up for this role. I mean, allegedly he didn't have to bulk up as much as he did for it, but like the guy took it very seriously, which is kind of a bitter pill to swallow how this film doesn't take itself seriously. I mean, death is never a good pill to swallow, but it's a very unfortunate way to go out. There's no way of sugarcoating that. But again, another instance of he did well with what he was doing. Like, these are by no means like grounded performances with like the kind of nuances of realism and such, but there is a nuance to how cartoony these guys are playing it as well. It still takes talent to play things up this much, to be as unrestrained as this. So, the highlights for me. Obviously, the action sequences are going to be a major highlight, because just Joel Schumacher just goes ham with just going ham. He's over the top for the sake of being over the top, and he's really, really good at it. Gotham City looks really cool. It doesn't look real, but it looks cool as hell. Elliot Goldenfall's score for this one borrows a lot from Batman Forever, but at the same time, it still fits the bill, and it's still a really great score. The puns are fun. I'd be lying if I said otherwise, guys. The scenes between Bruce and Alfred are fantastic. There's a good sense of dichotomy between Batman and Mr. Freeze, our protagonist and our antagonist. And I was consistently entertained. This thing is actually really well paced, especially when you consider how much is crammed into this thing. As for the negatives, yeah, okay, like the very concept of a Batman film being this light in a post-Tim Burton world, it's not the right way to go. The timing is undeniably bad here. The puns from the villains may be great fun, but the puns from the heroes, especially like Robin and Batgirl, don't work very well. And I don't think the theme of like, you know, staving off death for your loved one is driven home perfectly in the case of Bruce Wayne. There's definitely a few bumps in that road, but it does get there. It gets that point across. It could have just been that little bit more concise. You know, I really think that Batman and Robin could be given a new lease on life as like a Broadway theatrical show. like a musical kind of thing, as the film does feel very pantomime. But there's an amazing sense of scope and spectacle to this thing, which I think would just feel right at home on the stage. It's a big, fun family event, you know, you got a lot of action that'll keep the kids happy, but in that same way, in that very quintessentially Joel Schumacher way. It's a really sexy experience as well that I think adults will really enjoy too. Or maybe that's just that side of myself that has a soft spot for the camp and zany, I don't know. I'm a pretty campy guy, and this film just, I guess, speaks to that maybe. But on a whole, Batman and Robin is definitely not the worst movie ever. It's not the worst superhero movie I've ever seen. And it's not the worst Batman movie I've ever seen either. I'll probably say the worst Batman movie is 2016 Suicide Squad. Although if you don't count that as a Batman movie, I guess the Batman and Harley Quinn animated movie, but then again, if it has to be live action, well, I guess there aren't really any bad Batman movies if that's the case. Alright, don't shoot me, I've thought a lot about this. I don't feel comfortable putting The Dark Knight Rises below this in terms of quality, but I'll say this, I'm definitely more inclined to rewatch Batman and Robin than I am The Dark Knight Rises. I don't think The Dark Knight Rises is that good. I think it's got great stuff in there, I just don't think the film on a whole is that good. It's weird how this works. Just how this whole thing works. This is why I don't do number scores on film reviews, because there's so many different criteria, you know? Like, I guess it depends entirely on what the film wants to achieve and how successfully it achieves it. But as far as I'm concerned, Batman and Robin is pretty inoffensive. And I, for one, really like it. And that is why I think that now is the perfect time to forgive Batman and Robin. Oh, wait, no, I forgot the Batsuit has nipples on it. Yep, no, fuck it. 0 out of 10, guys. Terrible. Terrible. So, what do you guys think? If you enjoyed this video and you want to support more like it, be sure to hit that big, beautiful subscribe button. And of course, in the description below are links to different social media feeds, including the Patreon. If you're feeling extra generous, like the following people, who are J.K. Strife, Marcus Ward, Sirius the Skeptic, Biotinarts, Mr. SP, David 20 Covers, Sergio, John Comey, Shodin, George is Lost, Legendary Ray Ray, Cheesemaster769, Adam Myers, and Fayalan Schwarzentraub. Thank you guys, you are the best of the best, but as for the rest of you, thank you so much for watching, guys, and have a great day.